All right, so with our ability to grab this physics box, we now need to add a physics button that's going to allow us to make use of the box itself. So before we can get the script that's going to control the button, we actually need to create the button. So we're going to make a custom button based on some of these nice Unity cubes, as much as we like using them. So in our hierarchy here in the test scene, we're going to right-click, hit 3D Object and Cube. Immediately, we're going to rename this one to button base. This is going to be the bottom of our button. And then we're going to create an empty object on it by right-clicking the button base and hitting empty or hitting create game object. And then we're going to make that game object not a child of button base, but in fact swap them. So now button base will become an empty or become a child of our empty game object here. We're going to rename this to physics button, just like that. And then our button base, we're going to shrink it down probably to something like, we'll say 25Y scale, so you can adjust that in the transform component if you'd like. And we want to up the X and Z scale to 2 each. I think that's probably, actually, let's make it 3. We'll make it a bit bigger here. There we go. And now let's make sure we select our physics button object and not the actual base of the button here, and we'll move it down to the floor just so we get a better idea of what it's going to look like. And then we'll select our base button here, and we will duplicate it by clicking Control D, and that's going to make a second one. And we're going to bring this Z scale down to 2.5, and the X scale to 2.5, and the Z scale to 2.5, and that's going to get it nice in a similar size, but still kind of indented, I guess. And then we're going to raise this guy up just so that the bottom of the button, you can kind of see it here if you get real close to it in the scene view. We want the bottom of that button to just barely overlap with the base there. We're going go away, Malwarebytes. We're going to rename that one to, I believe, button movable. So we'll call that button movable. There we go. We want to right-click on button movable and hit create empty, and then drag that empty game object up between button base and button movable. We're going to call this inactive position, just like that. So we know that Y value, and then we're going to now click our button movable and push it down until we find a good spot where it looks like it's fully pressed. I think that looks good. Something like Y.03, somewhere in that area. And once we get it down, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to create an empty object and move it out between button movable and inactive position, and we're going to call this active position. Just like that. And then just for organizational purposes, I'm going to move my button movable up above these two positions so that we have a nice order here. Now what we want to do is actually color these two button objects. So we're going to use a material that comes with our other options here. Well, before we do that, let's actually reset our button's position. So we'll click on the active or inactive position game object here, inactive position. We're going to copy the Y value from this, so the 0.245. We're going to select it and hit Control or Command C, and then go to the button movable and paste that into that Y value. So that's going to pop it right back up to where it'll start at. And now what we're going to do is open our mesh renderer for this guy, and in this materials component, it says default material. Let's click on this circle, and we're going to select button mat. There we go. And then button base, we're going to click and do the same thing and select button base. Now we've got these nice textures that match our room pretty nicely here. And that's going to set up a nice visual representation of that. And then we're going to click on the physics button empty game object and drag that down into the gameplay prefabs folder. That's going to create a prefab for us. And then in the next step, we're going to handle or create the script that's going to handle controlling our button and making it actually activate things in our scene.